In the heart of an empire built on chains, there rose a man who refused to bow. Rome, the eternal conqueror, the devourer of nations, had enslaved millions beneath her banners of gold. Her legions marched like gods of iron, her laws crushed like stone. But deep in the blood and dust of her arenas, one slave broke the silence. His name was Spartacus, a Thracian warrior, condemned to die for the pleasure of tyrants. Yet in his heart burned a fire the empire could not tame. A whisper became a cry became an army, and the army became a storm that shook the very walls of Rome. This is not a tale of conquest. It is the story of freedom, born from chains and carried by courage. This is the legend of Spartacus, the slave who defied Rome. Welcome back to my channel. This channel specializes in writing about epic tales and myths from around the world. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to help me out. Today, we will dive into a story titled Spartacus, the Slave Who Defied Rome, the epic rebellion that shook an empire. Here is the detailed content. Chapter I, Born in Chains. Even the gods tremble before a man who refuses to bow. The wind screamed across the cold hills of Thrace. It carried the scent of blood, smoke, and the dying roar of men locked in hopeless battle. Among them fought a young warrior, bare-chested, his body painted with ash and crimson clay. His name was Spartacus, son of no noble, heir to no crown, only to the earth and its unyielding will. Steel clashed against steel as Roman soldiers advanced like a wall of iron. The Thracians fell, one by one, outnumbered, overwhelmed. Spartacus fought with the fury of a storm, his blade slicing through the air like lightning. He was not fighting for victory, he was fighting to be remembered. But fate, cruel and divine, had other plans. A Roman spear struck his side, and the world tilted. He fell to his knees, staring at the dark clouds swirling above a sky that wept for his people. As his vision dimmed, he saw a falcon soaring through the storm. In that fleeting moment, he swore that one day he would fly again, free, unchained. When Spartacus awoke, he was in darkness. Chains bit into his wrists. The air smelled of sweat and iron. He was no longer a warrior, he was property. A Roman trader barked orders as they dragged prisoners from the wagons. Strong back, clear eyes, the man muttered, appraising the captives. This one's worth more alive. The trader grinned, tapping Spartacus's chin with a stick. A Thracian, they fight well. Rome loves a fighter. Days turned into weeks. The prisoners were marched south, across rivers, plains, and deserts of stone, toward the heart of the empire. At every step, Spartacus heard the same language, the whip. Each crack was a reminder that he no longer owned his body. At night, by the flicker of dying campfires, he looked up to the stars, the same stars that once guided Thracian warriors to glory. Now they were only distant witnesses to his humiliation. Yet somewhere deep within, something refused to die. He whispered to the night, "Chains are not forever." They arrived at Capua, the city of blood and gold. There, under the shadow of marble temples, stood the Ludus Batiatus, one of Rome's most notorious gladiator schools. Inside its stone walls, men were turned into beasts for the entertainment of the crowd. The gate clanged shut behind Spartacus. The air was thick with the scent of oil, leather, and death. "Welcome to the pit," sneered a voice. A towering man with scars across his chest approached the doctor, the trainer. "Here, you fight, you bleed, and you die when Rome commands it." Learn quickly, Thracian, or the sand will drink your blood. They threw him into the barracks, a long hall filled with broken men, some sharpened blades in silence. Others stared at the floor, their eyes hollow. Only one, a Gaul named Crixus, met his gaze. "You look like a man who hasn't given up yet," Crixus said. Spartacus didn't answer. He simply looked down at his shackles, then up at the moonlight filtering through the bars. "Not yet," he murmured. The next morning, the training began. Wooden swords slammed into bodies, whips cracked, the sand turned red. Spartacus stumbled, fell, bled. Every movement was carved into his flesh. Every lesson burned into his mind. The Romans thought they were breaking him. Instead, they were forging something far more dangerous. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Spartacus stood alone in the yard. He touched the scar on his side, a reminder of the day he fell, and raised his practice sword toward the sky. "I was born a free man," he said to no one, "and I will die a free man." A voice behind him answered, "Then you will die soon." It was the doctor, but there was no cruelty in his tone, only understanding. "Freedom," he said, "is a word Rome forgot long ago." Spartacus turned to him. "Then I will remind them." Time passed, and Spartacus became a spectacle. His strength, his defiance, his eyes that never bowed, they fascinated even the Roman masters. But within those same eyes burned a question that would one day consume an empire. What if a slave refused to kneel, and somewhere deep beneath the arena, where the air was thick with sweat, and the ghosts of the fallen, whispers began to stir among the slaves? Whispers of escape, whispers of rebellion, whispers of one man who could lead them. In the dead of night, Spartacus dreamed again of the falcon wings spread wide over the mountains of Thrace. When he awoke, he realized the dream was not a memory. It was a prophecy. The chains around his wrists gleamed faintly in the moonlight, like molten silver, waiting, perhaps, to be shattered. And in the silence of the Gladiator school, as Rome slept beneath her marble pride, a storm began to form, not in the sky, but in the heart of a man born in chains. Chapter 2: The Blood and the Sand, where chains break not by mercy, but by blood. The sun burned above Capua, scorching the arena like the eye of an angry god. Thousands of Romans filled the stands, their voices rising like the sea, chanting, laughing, thirsting for blood. To them, the arena was sacred. It was where death was entertainment, and men were offerings to their boredom. Beneath that roaring ocean of humanity stood Spartacus, stripped to the waist, a sword of dull iron in his hand. His heart pounded like the drums of war. Sweat trickled down his back, but his eyes, those fierce, defiant eyes, never wavered. Around him were the others, gladiators, slaves like him. They waited behind the iron gates, the scent of sand and blood filling their lungs. Above the gate, carved into marble, was the motto of Rome's might, Vita est ludus. Life is a game. The doctor walked among them, his voice calm and cold. Remember what Rome wants. They want a show. Give them fear, give them death, or they will take yours. Crixus the Gaul smirked and clapped Spartacus on the shoulder. Today, brother, we fight, so they may eat and cheer. Tomorrow, maybe the gods will grow tired of this game. Spartacus answered with silence, but in his heart a storm was building. The gate rose with a grinding roar, and light poured in like the breath of the gods. The crowd howled. The blood and the sand, the sacred ritual of spectacle, had begun. Two men were pushed into the arena first. They faced each other, trembling, reluctant. The crowd grew restless. A whip cracked from the overseer's stand. Fight. One man lunged, clumsy and desperate. The other swung blindly. Blades met flesh. Blood spattered the golden sand. The crowd erupted in delight. Spartacus watched from the shadows of the gate as the dying man fell to his knees, his eyes hollow. His blood seeped into the sand, a crimson flower that Rome would soon trample. "Beautiful, isn't it?" said a voice beside him. It was Enemos, an older gladiator with eyes like forged iron. "Rome builds its glory on that red dust. Someday it will choke on it." When his turn came, the gate opened again. The roar hit him like thunder. Spartacus stepped into the blinding light, into the heart of Rome's hunger. His opponent was a Myrmelo, a mountain of a man, armored from head to toe, his helmet shaped like a wolf's snarl. He circled Spartacus slowly, sword raised high. The crowd chanted the Myrmelo's name, betting coins and lives with the same breath. The referee's hand cut through the air. "Begin," the Myrmelo charged. His sword came down like a hammer. Spartacus leaped aside, the strike missing his head by a whisper. He countered, quick and low, slicing at the man's knee. Sparks flew from iron. The giant stumbled, but his shield slammed into Spartacus's chest, sending him sprawling into the dust. The crowd roared, "Kill him! Kill the Thracian!" Spartacus gasped, his vision spinning. He could hear his own heart over the noise, a drumbeat of defiance. As the Myrmelo raised his blade for the final strike, Spartacus rolled, seized a handful of sand, and flung it into his opponent's eyes. The Myrmelo roared, blinded. Spartacus lunged his sword, piercing through the slit of the helmet. Blood sprayed into the air like a crimson mist. Silence. Then thunder. The crowd erupted in a roar that shook the sky. The announcer's voice rang out, "Victory, the Thracian lives." Spartacus stood over the fallen giant, chest heaving. His sword trembled in his hand. He looked up at the stands, thousands of faces, cheering, worshipping violence, and among them, nobles and senators smiled, raising their golden cups. He felt no glory, only disgust. He raised his weapon not in triumph, but in defiance, a gesture so small, yet so dangerous, that even the doctor noticed. In the shadowed corridor, beneath the arena, Crixus met him with a grin. "You fight like a beast, Thracian. The crowd will love you." Spartacus's voice was low. "Then the crowd is blind." The doctor approached. "You won today, but remember, Rome never truly loses. It only waits for you to fall." Spartacus stared at the blood drying on his hands, then let it wait. That night, the arena was quiet, but in the barracks, the slaves whispered. They spoke of the Thracian, who fought not for Rome's applause, but for something else, something the masters could not understand: freedom. As Spartacus lay in the dark, he felt the ache of his wounds, the sting of iron cuffs. Outside, the moonlight fell on the sand where he had fought, still red from the blood of the fallen. He whispered to himself, "If Rome lives by blood, then I will drown it in its own." And thus, under the crimson moon, the first spark of rebellion flickered, tiny, fragile, but alive. A flame born not of hatred, but of hope. The flame of Spartacus. Chapter 3. The Whisper of Freedom. Every empire begins with a word. Every rebellion begins with a whisper. Night in Capua was never silent. The air hummed with the restless breath of slaves, the clank of chains, and the faint echo of cheers still lingering from the day's slaughter. Beyond the stone walls of the Ludus Batiatus, Torches flickered like dying stars, throwing jagged shadows across the dirt. Spartacus lay awake on the cold floor of the barracks. His body was covered in bruises, his arms stiff from training. But pain no longer mattered. Pain was familiar. It was the sound of Rome breathing. What haunted him was the silence between heartbeats, a silence filled with memory. He remembered his homeland, Thrace, the scent of pine and wild earth, his wife's laughter before the Romans came, the cry of his child that never saw the light. Now that world was gone, burned, buried, forgotten, yet in his chest something refused to die. A single word, freedom. That night he heard a voice in the dark, Thracian. It was Inamus, the old gladiator, sitting by the wall, sharpening his blade with a broken stone. His face was half lit by the moonlight, slipping through the bars. "You fight like a man who's already dead," the old man said. Spartacus's voice was low. "Maybe I am." Inamos chuckled, a sound dry as sand. "No, the dead do not dream. But I've seen your eyes in the arena. You dream still. That's dangerous. Dreams are all a slave has left." "No," Inamos whispered. "Dreams are the first thing Rome takes." He leaned closer, but sometimes they return. The next morning word spread among the gladiators quietly, like smoke under the door. A slave from the kitchens had stolen a small knife. Another had overheard the guards talking about transferring some of the fighters to Pompeii. In every corner of the barracks, men whispered. The same word passed from mouth to mouth, fragile yet powerful: escape. Crixus, bold and reckless, laughed at first. Escape. Through the gates of Batiatus, you'd have a better chance flying to the moon. But Spartacus said nothing. He simply watched the iron locks on the door, as if he could already see them broken. Inamos noticed. "Do you believe it can be done?" Spartacus looked up. "Rome bleeds, same as we do. Every lock has a key. Every wall has a crack, and every man has a choice." That evening, the doctor ordered a brutal round of sparring. Men were forced to fight until they collapsed. One gladiator, too weak to rise, was beaten to death before the others. A warning. The message was clear. Rome is watching. Rome does not forgive. But for Spartacus, every lash, every drop of blood only made the whisper grow louder. When night fell again, he sat alone, staring through the barred window at the distant stars. Crixus came to sit beside him, chewing on a piece of stale bread. "You think we can run, Thracian?" Spartacus didn't answer immediately. His gaze stayed on the horizon. "Do you remember the sky before Rome?" Crixus frowned. "The sky. In my land," Spartacus said softly, "the stars were so bright they burned. My father said the gods live among them, watching the brave and the foolish. Tonight, I wonder if they still look down on us, or if they've turned away." Crixus sighed. "If they're watching, they've got a cruel sense of humor." "Maybe," Spartacus said. "But if they are watching, I want them to see what we do next." Later that night, a new sound filled the barracks, a faint rhythm, subtle and slow. Tap, tap, pause, tap. It was the sound of chains against the floor, a signal passed from cell to cell. The slaves had begun to speak in code. Plans whispered in the dark, names traded in secrecy. Hope born from blood and silence. Inamos muttered, "The gods are waking." And Spartacus, staring at the moon through the bars, whispered back, "No, men are." In the courtyard, the doctor looked out over the sleeping gladiators. He could sense something in the air, a tension, like the breath before lightning strikes. He had seen men break before, But this was different. These men were not breaking, they were building. In the morning, as the gates creaked open and the slaves marched toward the training yard, Spartacus glanced at the horizon once more. For the first time since he was taken, he smiled, because he realized something Rome would never understand. Chains could bind the body, but never the soul. And once a soul whispers of freedom, even the gods must listen. Chapter 4: The Breaking of Chains. Freedom is not granted. It is seized with blood, with fire, and with unyielding will. The morning began like any other in the Ludus Batiatus, the clang of iron gates, the barking orders of the doctor, the smell of sweat and sand thick in the air. But beneath that routine beat the pulse of something new, fear, hope, and fury coiling together like a sleeping beast ready to wake. Spartacus rose before dawn, silent, watching the others stir in the dim light. His eyes were sharper than steel, his breath steady. He knew this would be the day. For weeks, he and a few trusted men, Crixus, Inamos, and a Syrian gladiator named Nazar, had been planning, whispering through the dark hours, gathering scraps of metal, sharpening bones, stealing blades from the kitchen. They had no army, no banners, only courage and desperation. At midday, a Roman guard struck a slave for spilling water. The crack of the whip echoed through the yard. Spartacus's fists clenched. Crixus glanced at him. A small nod passed between them. The moment had come. When the guard turned away, Spartacus moved like a shadow. The chain around his wrist swung, and with one brutal motion, he drove it into the Roman's throat. A burst of blood, a cry, the sound that would start a war. Chaos erupted. Now, Spartacus shouted. The yard exploded into violence. Gladiators lunged at their oppressors, bare hands, broken chains, stolen blades. Guards screamed as slaves turned upon them, fury unleashed after years of silence. Crixus tore a spear from a fallen soldier, hurling it through another man's chest. Inamos, though old, fought like a god of war reborn. Every strike deliberate, every movement precise. Blood soaked the sand, mixing with sweat and fire. The doctor ran forward, shouting orders, but Spartacus was already upon him. Enough. Spartacus roared, his chain striking the man's sword aside. You taught us to fight. Now learn what your lessons made. They clashed, iron against iron, master against pupil. At last, Spartacus disarmed him and pressed the blade to his throat. The doctor met his eyes. Then make it count, Thracian. Make it mean something. Spartacus hesitated, then lowered the weapon. There's been enough death for one day, he said. But Rome will answer for the rest. By nightfall, the Ludus was theirs. The remaining guards fled or lay dead upon the sand. The slaves broke open the armory, arming themselves with Roman swords, shields, and armor. The air was alive with the sound of victory, shouts, laughter, tears. But Spartacus stood apart, looking toward the gates of Capua. Beyond them lay the world and the wrath of Rome. Crixus came to stand beside him, wiping blood from his face. What now, Thracian? Spartacus's eyes burned with purpose. Now we fight, not for vengeance, for freedom. Inamos frowned. Freedom is a word Rome does not understand. Then we will teach them, Spartacus replied. With every breath we have left. They marched that night, 200 slaves slipping through the darkness, torches held high, hearts beating as one. Women and children joined them along the road, drawn by the whispers of rebellion. The mountains of Vesuvius loomed in the distance, dark, ancient, and waiting. As they climbed the rocky path, Spartacus looked back at the flames of Capua rising behind them. He knew Rome would come. He knew the legions would hunt them like beasts. But for the first time, he felt no fear. For the first time, he walked not as a slave, but as a leader, a symbol, a man reborn in defiance. At dawn, the sun rose red over the mountains. Spartacus raised his sword, its edge catching the first light. "Today we break our chains," he said, "and tomorrow Rome will tremble." Chapter 5. The Blood of the Mountain. When the hunted become the hunters, even gods learn fear. The slopes of Mount Vesuvius were steep, black, and silent. Rocks crumbled beneath bare feet as hundreds of escaped slaves climbed toward the clouds, guided only by the light of their torches and the voice of one man, Spartacus. Behind them, the night burned red. Capua was far below, consumed by fire and vengeance. Every step up that mountain was a step away from chains, and yet a step closer to war. Spartacus paused near a jagged ridge and looked down. The city lights flickered like dying embers. For the first time, he felt the vastness of his rebellion, fragile, unplanned, yet unstoppable. Crixus climbed beside him, carrying a stolen Roman sword. "We are hunted men," he said, panting. "The Senate will not ignore this." Spartacus nodded. "Then let them come. Let Rome climb this mountain to find us." They reached the crater by dawn, a hollow crown of stone and ash. The mountain groaned beneath their feet, the earth warm with the breath of ancient fire. To the slaves, it was a place of gods and monsters. To Spartacus, it was sanctuary. He stood before them all, Gauls, Thracians, Syrians, Greeks, hundreds of broken souls, united by a single word: freedom. "This mountain is our fortress," he declared. "Rome will call us fugitives, but from these heights, we will teach them what it means to fear the ones they thought beneath them." The crowd erupted, fists raised, voices roaring like thunder in the mist. For the first time, the slaves had found a leader who spoke not like a king, but like one of them. Days turned into weeks. They built camps, forged weapons from plowshares and chains, hunted the forests for food. Women and children tended fires. Men trained with whatever they could find: broken swords, stolen shields, wooden spears hardened by flame. Crixus led the Gauls in brutal drills. Inamos taught discipline, shouting, "A free man must fight harder than a soldier who kills for pay." Spartacus moved among them constantly, eating their food, sharing their labor, listening to their pain. He was not their master. He was their mirror, their will made flesh. But Rome was already moving. The Senate laughed at first. A band of slaves, they called them, and sent a small militia led by Claudius Glaber, confident he would crush the rebellion easily. From the valley below, the Roman troops encircled the mountain, blocking every known path. They waited, sure that hunger would do the killing for them. Trapped, the rebels' supplies dwindled. Rain lashed the camps. Some men whispered of surrender. Others prayed to forgotten gods. Spartacus stood at the cliff's edge, rain streaming down his face, eyes fixed on the Roman fires below. He did not pray, he planned. At midnight, under the cover of the storm, he gathered his captains. "We are surrounded," Crixus said. "Glaber waits for us to starve." Spartacus's lips curved into a cold smile. Then let him wait for his own death. He led them to the southern edge, where the mountain dropped into a sheer wall of stone and thorns. "We climb down here," he said. Inamos frowned. "That's madness. No army can scale that." "No army," Spartacus replied. "But slaves who have nothing to lose can, through the storm and darkness." They cut vines into ropes, knotting them with bleeding hands. One by one, they descended the cliffs, silent shadows slipping through the rain. Spartacus went last, his sword tied to his back, eyes fixed on the valley below, where Roman guards slept in their arrogance. When the last man reached the ground, Spartacus drew his blade. Now, he whispered, we become Rome's nightmare. The attack was sudden, savage, and complete. The Romans awoke to fire and screams, slaves bursting from the mist like avenging spirits. Spartacus's sword struck down Glaber's men one after another, each blow fueled by years of suffering. Crixus crushed a Roman centurion beneath his shield. Inamos roared like a storm as he tore through the tents. By dawn, the valley was red with blood. The Roman camp was gone. Glaber himself was impaled upon a spear and left as a warning. This mountain bleeds for freedom. When the sun rose, smoke curled from the wreckage below. Spartacus stood atop the ridge, his followers kneeling around him. This is the beginning, he said quietly. Rome sent their dogs. We broke them. Next, they will send their legions, and we will break them too. He looked out at the endless horizon. Below lay Italy, rich, powerful, cruel. Above, the sky burned red with dawn, and somewhere in between, a slave had become a symbol, the symbol of a world that dared to fight its masters. Chapter 6. Legions of Iron. Rome forged its legions from iron and discipline. But freedom forges something stronger, the will to live. Spring spread across the Italian hills, green and golden beneath the sun. The snows of Vesuvius melted into rivers, and from the shadow of the mountain, a new army began to form. What had once been a mob of escaped slaves was now a force that drilled, marched, and fought under banners made from torn Roman cloth. At its head, Spartacus, no longer a fugitive, but a commander. Every morning, the valley echoed with the clash of wooden swords, the thud of shields, and the rhythm of war drums. Crixus led the Gauls in brutal drills. Inamos taught them formation and discipline. Spartacus moved among them, calm but fierce, shaping chaos into purpose. He had learned from Rome, and now he would use Rome's own art against her. One day, while his army trained, a scout rode hard from the south to legions march from Rome. He gasped, led by Consul Verinius himself. Murmurs rippled through the camp. 2 Roman legions, over 10,000 men, armored, disciplined, unstoppable. Crixus spat. They think we are insects to be crushed beneath their sandals. Spartacus looked toward the horizon, where dust rose like a storm. Then we will show them, he said softly, that even insects can bite the gods. The next morning, Spartacus called his captains to the war tent. A crude map of Italy lay spread before them, drawn on animal skin, marked with stones and lines of ash. They will come through the valley, he said, tracing the path with a dagger. They believe we will meet them head-on. We won't, Crixus frowned. We outnumber them now. Why not crush them in the open? Spartacus met his gaze. Because Rome expects arrogance. I'll give them humility and death. As the Roman legions advanced, they found the rebel camp abandoned, tents burned, fires cold, only silence and smoke. Verinius smiled. They flee, he said, just as slaves always do. But that night, while the Romans slept in the ruins, shadows moved in the hills. Spartacus and his men descended like wolves, silent, precise, merciless. They struck at dawn. From both sides of the valley, the rebel army poured down, roaring with fury and freedom. Trumpets blared, swords flashed. The Romans scrambled into formation, but it was too late. Flaming boulders rolled down from the cliffs, crushing lines of soldiers. Hidden archers loosed volleys of arrows into the chaos. Then Spartacus charged. He fought at the front, sword flashing in the morning sun. His strikes were pure, controlled, almost divine. Every motion born from years in the arena. A Roman centurion lunged at him. Spartacus sidestepped and split the man's helmet with one swing. Crixus led the Gauls in a furious wedge, smashing into the Roman flank. Inamos, scarred and relentless, held the line against cavalry charges. The valley became a furnace, blood and fire and ire. By midday, the Roman banners were falling. Verinius' voice cracked as he shouted for order, and then fell silent as a spear took him through the chest. When the smoke cleared, Rome's legions were broken. 10,000 had marched into the valley. Less than half crawled out. That night, the rebels feasted. Wine, laughter, and victory filled the air. But Spartacus sat apart, staring into the flames. Crixus approached him, drunk on triumph. "We did it, brother. Rome bleeds." Spartacus nodded slowly. "And she will come again, stronger, angrier, hungrier for our blood." "This is not victory," he said. "It is only the beginning." Inamos joined them, eyes weary. "Then we march before they can recover. North." Spartacus raised his gaze to the stars. Yes, to the Alps. Beyond their reach, he turned to the thousands celebrating below. "They call us slaves. Let us show them we are soldiers." The next morning, the rebel army marched north, 20,000 strong. They carried Roman armor, Roman weapons, Roman discipline, but not Roman hearts. Every footstep was a heartbeat of defiance. Above them, eagles circled in the sky. Below them, Rome trembled, and in the space between them stood a man who was once a slave, and now the leader of an army that defied an empire. Chapter 7. The Banner of Freedom. An empire can crush bodies, but not the fire that burns in the hearts of the free. The wind over the plains of Lucania carried the scent of spring and smoke, the breath of rebellion. Behind Spartacus stretched a sea of faces, men, women, children, all once bound in chains, now marching with heads high. They had no king, no senate, no marble temples. They had only faith in him. He rode at the front on a white horse, armor glinting beneath the morning sun. The red cloak of a Roman commander now hung on his shoulders, torn from a fallen enemy, worn as a symbol of defiance. The banners they carried were crude, at first, rags painted with ashes and blood. But upon them, the same symbol appeared again and again, a broken chain encircled by a rising sun, the mark of the free. In every town they passed, slaves threw down their tools and joined the march. Fields emptied, workshops fell silent, and villas burned as masters fled. The rebellion spread like wildfire, unstoppable, untamed. From the mountains of Samnium to the rivers of Apulia, the people whispered his name as if it were a prayer. Spartacus, the slave who defied Rome, the man who gave them hope. But Spartacus himself walked the edge between triumph and burden. At night, he sat by the fire, staring into the flames, while Crixus and Inamos argued about their next move. Crixus slammed his fist into the table. "Why march north? Let us take Rome. The city is vulnerable, its legions scattered." Inamos shook his head. "We are not ready. 1,000 victories will not change that if we lack unity." Spartacus listened in silence. Then he rose. "The moment we march on Rome, we become Rome. We will conquer, enslave, destroy, and everything we fight for will die." He looked at them both, brothers in war, but divided by vision. "We fight not to rule," he said, "but to live free." The next morning, he ordered a new banner made, not of blood or ashes, but of pure white cloth, trimmed with gold. Upon it, the broken chain and rising sun were painted in crimson. He gathered his soldiers before him, tens of thousands now, an army of the unforgotten. "Rome fights for power," he said, his voice echoing across the hills. "We fight for the breath in our lungs, for the light in our children's eyes, for the right to stand without fear." He raised the banner high. "This is not my flag," he declared. "This is yours. This is freedom." The army erupted in a roar that shook the valley, a sound of hearts beating as one. Swords struck shields in rhythm, echoing like thunder. "Freedom, freedom," they cried. From that day forward, every slave who fled carried that symbol in their hearts, and every Roman who saw it knew terror. But not all who followed understood Spartacus's dream. Some sought vengeance more than liberty. Crixus and his Gauls grew restless, hungry for conquest. One night they came to him again. "While you dream of ideals," Crixus said, "Rome rebuilds. We should strike before they gather their legions." Spartacus looked into the darkness. "And what then, brother? We take the city. Crown ourselves kings. Will freedom be one with another throne?" Crixus's eyes hardened. "Perhaps freedom is a sword, not a dream." He turned and walked away, taking several thousand men with him. Spartacus watched them go, his heart heavy, yet resolute. "May his gods protect him," he whispered. "We will meet again, in glory or in grief." In the days that followed, word reached them that Crixus's army had been crushed near Mount Garganus. The Romans displayed the heads of the slain along the road as a warning. Spartacus stood before the grim sight, eyes burning not with despair, but fury. He ordered his army to bury the dead with honor, not as rebels, but as martyrs. Then he turned to his men. "Rome believes this will break us," he said, "but every death is a stone in the road to freedom." He raised the white banner again, now streaked with crimson. "Let them see, we do not bow, we do not kneel, we do not die in silence." That night, under a sky torn by lightning, Spartacus stood alone on the hilltop, the banner fluttering behind him. The wind howled through the valley, carrying the cries of his people, cries of hunger, grief, and hope. He whispered into the storm, "If I must fall, let it be not as a slave, but as the fire that teaches the world to burn." And from that storm, a legend was born, not of victory, but of a man who turned defiance into destiny. Chapter the 8th. The Divided Sword. No empire can break the chains of men as easily as pride can. The white banner of freedom fluttered above the hills of Lucania, but beneath its light, the hearts of men began to fracture. Where once they had stood as one, now whispers of division wound through the camps like smoke, silent, poisonous, unstoppable. Crixus was gone, taking with him the fierce Gauls and Germans who had sworn to follow him to the end. Spartacus watched the fires of their departing columns fade into the distance, each ember a fragment of the dream he once held whole. The shadow of division for days, silence haunted the camp. The sound of hammers forging blades could not drown out the truth. The rebellion was no longer one voice. Inamos, old and scarred, came to Spartacus one evening. "Your dream is too pure for this world," he said. "Men do not follow visions, they follow victory, and Rome has returned with vengeance in her eyes." Spartacus stared into the night where the faint glow of Roman watchfires burned on the horizon. "Then let them come," he answered. "If freedom must bleed, it will not die quietly." But in his heart, he knew Enemos was right. Freedom was easy to believe in when the sun was high, harder when hunger and fear crept through the ranks. 2. The fall of Crixus. Then came the news. A scout, breathless and blood-streaked, rode into the camp and fell from his horse before Spartacus's tent. His trembling hand held a Roman standard, broken, soaked in blood. "Crixus," he gasped, "he is fallen." The words struck like thunder. Crixus's army, 10,000 strong, had been ambushed near Mount Garganus. He had fought like a lion, cutting through ranks until surrounded. When his sword shattered, he used his bare hands, and when they cut him down, he died roaring the word that had united them all: freedom. Spartacus said nothing. He took the broken Roman standard, raised it, and ordered the horns to sound for 3 days. The rebellion halted its march to mourn the fallen. Then Spartacus gathered his men upon the plains and lit 1,000 torches in the night. "This fire," he said, "burns for Crixus, and for every brother who fell with him." He lifted his sword toward the sky. "For every Roman taken by pride and cruelty, we will take 100 in return." The torches flared like stars of wrath. That night, they marched, and Rome wept in terror. 3. The price of vengeance. The vengeance of Spartacus was swift and merciless. 12,000 Roman prisoners were taken in battle, officers, soldiers, and slavers. Many urged him to execute them. Others, weary of blood, begged for mercy. Spartacus stood between the two tides, his face carved from stone. He ordered the prisoners brought before him, bound and trembling. Then, with a voice that carried through the valley, he said, "You built your empire on the backs of the chained. You fed on the tears of the weak. Now look upon those who dared to rise." He turned to his men. "We will honor the dead, not with words, but with justice," at his command. The Romans were forced to fight in pairs upon the sands, as slaves once did for their master's amusement. But now it was the slaves who watched. When the last body fell, Spartacus whispered, "Let Rome taste its own cruelty." The valley ran red that night, and the name of Spartacus became legend and curse alike, savior to some, monster to others. 4. The rift deepens, but vengeance is a fire that devours both enemy and friend. Some of his commanders, Castus, Gannicus, and Enemos, began to question him. "Each Roman we kill," said Gannicus, "makes 10 more rise in their place. What will your justice bring but endless war?" Spartacus answered, "Better an endless war than an endless chain." Enemos shook his head. "You fight for freedom, but your men fight for blood. Can you not see the difference?" The words cut deep. Spartacus turned away, his eyes shadowed by doubt. He had led thousands out of bondage, but could he still lead them away from hate? The oath renewed the next dawn. Spartacus gathered what remained of his faithful before the white banner. He raised his sword, not to the gods, nor to vengeance, but to the dream that had started it all. "Brothers and sisters," he said, "Rome calls us beasts, but beasts kill only to live. Men kill for power. We must be better." He looked toward the horizon, where the smoke of Roman legions rose like storm clouds. "Our road grows darker from here. But remember, freedom is not won by blades alone. It is carried in our hearts, even to the grave." He planted the banner in the earth. The wind caught it, unfurling the crimson sun and broken chain. The men knelt, touching the soil, not in worship, but in promise. From the hills, their cry rose again, fierce and unbroken. Freedom. That night, as thunder rolled across the plains, Spartacus stood alone beside the banner. Rain fell, washing the blood from his hands, but not from his soul. He whispered into the storm, "If Rome is a mountain, then I will be the fire that cracks it, even if I burn with it." Chapter the 8th. The divided sword. No empire can break the chains of men as easily as pride can. The white banner of freedom fluttered above the hills of Lucania, but beneath its light, the hearts of men began to fracture. Where once they had stood as one, now whispers of division wound through the camps like smoke, silent, poisonous, unstoppable. Crixus was gone, taking with him the fierce Gauls and Germans who had sworn to follow him to the end. Spartacus watched the fires of their departing columns fade into the distance, each ember a fragment of the dream he once held whole. The shadow of division for days, silence haunted the camp. The sound of hammers forging blades could not drown out the truth. The rebellion was no longer one voice. Inemos, old and scarred, came to Spartacus one evening. "Your dream is too pure for this world," he said. "Men do not follow visions, they follow victory, and Rome has returned with vengeance in her eyes." Spartacus stared into the night, where the faint glow of Roman watchfires burned on the horizon. "Then let them come," he answered. "If freedom must bleed, it will not die quietly." But in his heart, he knew Enemos was right. Freedom was easy to believe in when the sun was high, harder when hunger and fear crept through the ranks. 2. The fall of Crixus. Then came the news. A scout, breathless and blood-streaked, rode into the camp and fell from his horse before Spartacus's tent. His trembling hand held a Roman standard, broken, soaked in blood. "Crixus," he gasped, "he is fallen." The words struck like thunder. Crixus's army, 10,000 strong, had been ambushed near Mount Garganus. He had fought like a lion, cutting through ranks until surrounded. When his sword shattered, he used his bare hands, and when they cut him down, he died roaring the word that had united them all: freedom. Spartacus said nothing. He took the broken Roman standard, raised it, and ordered the horns to sound for 3 days. The rebellion halted its march to mourn the fallen. Then Spartacus gathered his men upon the plains and lit 1,000 torches in the night. "This fire," he said, "burns for Crixus and for every brother who fell with him." He lifted his sword toward the sky. "For every Roman taken by pride and cruelty, we will take 100 in return." The torches flared like stars of wrath. That night they marched, and Rome wept in terror. 3. The price of vengeance. The vengeance of Spartacus was swift and merciless. 12,000 Roman prisoners were taken in battle, officers, soldiers, and slavers. Many urged him to execute them. Others, weary of blood, begged for mercy. Spartacus stood between the two tides, his face carved from stone. He ordered the prisoners brought before him, bound and trembling. Then, with a voice that carried through the valley, he said, "You built your empire on the backs of the chained. You fed on the tears of the weak. Now look upon those who dared to rise." He turned to his men. "We will honor the dead, not with words, but with justice," at his command. The Romans were forced to fight in pairs upon the sands, as slaves once did for their masters' amusement. But now it was the slaves who watched. When the last body fell, Spartacus whispered, "Let Rome taste its own cruelty." The valley ran red that night, and the name of Spartacus became legend and curse alike, savior to some, monster to others. 4. The rift deepens, but vengeance is a fire that devours both enemy and friend. Some of his commanders, Castus, Gannicus, and Inamos, began to question him. Each Roman we kill, said Gannicus, makes 10 more rise in their place. What will your justice bring but endless war? Spartacus answered, better an endless war than an endless chain. Inamos shook his head. You fight for freedom, but your men fight for blood. Can you not see the difference? The words cut deep. Spartacus turned away, his eyes shadowed by doubt. He had led thousands out of bondage, but could he still lead them away from hate? The oath renewed the next dawn. Spartacus gathered what remained of his faithful before the white banner. He raised his sword, not to the gods, nor to vengeance, but to the dream that had started it all. Brothers and sisters, he said, Rome calls us beasts, but beasts kill only to live. Men kill for power. We must be better. He looked toward the horizon, where the smoke of Roman legions rose like storm clouds. Our road grows darker from here. But remember, freedom is not won by blades alone. It is carried in our hearts, even to the grave. He planted the banner in the earth. The wind caught it, unfurling the crimson sun and broken chain. The men knelt, touching the soil, not in worship, but in promise. From the hills, their cry rose again, fierce and unbroken. Freedom. That night, as thunder rolled across the plains, Spartacus stood alone beside the banner. Rain fell, washing the blood from his hands, but not from his soul. He whispered into the storm, if Rome is a mountain, then I will be the fire that cracks it, even if I burn with it. Chapter 9. The March of the Legions. Rome does not forgive those who make her bleed. The iron of Rome, awakens far across the Italian plains. The Senate gathered in fury. Old men in white togas shouted over one another as maps of the Italian countryside lay sprawled. Before them, marked with black scars where Spartacus had struck, 80,000 slaves, spat one senator. 80,000, and our legions, in retreat, not slaves. Another corrected bitterly. An army. The chamber fell silent. Then, from the shadows at the far end, a voice rose calm, heavy with wealth and confidence. Then it is time, said Marcus Licinius Crassus, for Rome to remind the world who rules it. Crassus, the richest man alive, stepped into the light. His eyes burned, not with zeal, but with calculation. Where others sought glory, he sought control. I will not fight this war for honor, he told the Senate. I will fight it to restore order. Rome is aflame. I will make it burn again. And so, under his command, 10 legions were raised, the greatest army Rome had mustered since the Punic Wars. The march of the legions began. 2. The road of fire. From Capua to the Apennines, the thunder of boots rolled like a storm. Villages trembled as Roman banners, drenched in crimson, blazed against the horizon. Crassus rode at the front, his armor polished to mirror brightness, his face unreadable. Behind him, his lieutenant Cassian rode grimly. You've seen the reports, my lord. Spartacus has divided his forces, one toward the Alps, the other remains in Lucania. Crassus's lips curved into a thin smile. Then we will divide him further, until nothing remains but ashes. As the legions advanced, they left a trail of fire and fear. Every slave caught outside the rebel ranks was crucified along the roads, a warning to those who dared to dream of freedom. The smell of burning villages reached the mountains where Spartacus waited. He watched the smoke rise, his jaw clenched. "They've learned," said Gannicus beside him. "This is no longer the Rome of fools. This is Crassus." Spartacus nodded. "Then let him come. The mountain will test his iron." 3. The meeting of shadows night descended like iron. In the dim firelight of the rebel camp, Spartacus and his remaining generals gathered. Maps were spread upon the earth, marked with Roman movements, rivers and valleys. "We can strike their supply lines," said Inamos. "Force them to starve before they reach us." Gannicus shook his head. "No, they have too many. If we stay, we'll be crushed. We should march north, cross the Alps while we still can." But Spartacus's eyes burned with something deeper than strategy. "And leave the dead unavenged. Leave Crixus to dust and chains. No, Rome must feel the weight of every life it broke." The camp fell silent. Even those who worshipped him began to fear his resolve. Freedom had once been his dream. Now it had become his war. IV. Crassus's trap. Down below, Crassus studied his enemy from afar. "Spartacus fights with passion," he said to Cassian, "and passion blinds. Let him strike first, and we shall close the jaws." He ordered trenches dug, stretching for miles, cutting off the rebel retreat toward the sea. For every foot of earth, Roman soldiers toiled with grim determination. A wall of earth and blood rose beneath the southern stars. Crassus's barrier, meant to cage the lion of Thrace. When word reached Spartacus, his fury was volcanic. "He dares to trap us like beasts," he shouted. Then quieter. "Good. Then he has come close enough to kill." That night, Spartacus gathered his best warriors and rode through the storm. The rain fell like arrows as they struck the Roman lines, breaking through trenches, cutting through guards, torching the siege works. The Romans reeled, but Crassus did not panic. "Let him bleed himself dry," he murmured. "Every victory he wins brings him closer to ruin." The clash of fire and faith at dawn. The two armies finally faced one another upon the plains of Pedalia. Thunder rolled across the sky as the banners of both sides snapped in the wind. The eagle of Rome against the broken chain of the slaves. Spartacus stood at the front, his sword raised high. Behind him, a sea of men roared, Gauls, Thracians, Syrians, Africans, all who had once been slaves. Across the field, Crassus's legions moved with mechanical precision, shields locked, formations flawless. When the horns of war sounded, the world seemed to tremble. The clash was titanic, iron against iron, flesh against will. Spartacus fought at the vanguard, his blade a storm, his voice carrying above the chaos. "Break your chains, break Rome." Crassus watched from his command hill.com and calculating. "Now," he said. At his signal, the flanks of the Roman army closed in like a steel serpent. The rebel ranks buckled, trapped, bleeding, roaring. Yet even as the tide turned, Spartacus refused to yield. He cut down the Roman standard-bearer himself, seizing the crimson eagle and driving it into the mud. "Let Rome kneel before her slaves," he cried. The end of the day, by nightfall, the plains were carpeted in corpses. The rebellion still stood, battered, bloodied, but not broken. Crassus, watching the retreating fires of Spartacus's camp, finally spoke. "He is no fool. He will not die easily. But every step north is a step into my trap." And so began the final phase, a chase through Italy, where every valley burned, every mountain ran with blood. Spartacus led his weary army toward the north, toward the faint hope of the Alps and freedom beyond. But even he began to feel it now, the weight of destiny pressing down, whispering that not all who fight for freedom live to see it. That night, as the rain fell upon the corpses of friend and foe alike, Spartacus looked to the heavens and whispered, "If the gods will not grant us liberty, then let them grant us remembrance." The wind carried his words away, over the blood-soaked fields toward a Rome that waited, sharpening its swords for the end. Chapter 10. The Broken Path. When hope fades, even the stars turn their faces away. The long march north. Snow fell upon the Italian mountains like the ashes of forgotten gods. Spartacus marched at the head of his people, a sea of faces carved by exhaustion. They had won battles no slaves were meant to win, but victory had grown heavy. Behind him, the murmurs of discontent rippled through the ranks like disease. "We march to nowhere," muttered one man. "Freedom lies beyond the Alps," another whispered. "If we ever reach them alive." The road was narrow, jagged, cruel. Every step northward was paid in blood. The Romans, relentless as the winter wind, harried them from behind. No longer was this an army of rebellion, it was a nation in flight. Spartacus paused upon a ridge, his cloak snapping in the wind. Below, his people stumbled through the snow, carrying children, wounded memories. He looked north, toward the distant white peaks. Freedom lay there, perhaps, but as he gazed, a thought gnawed at his heart. What is freedom, if it costs every life I swore to protect? 2. Cracks in the Brotherhood at night, around a flickering fire. The remaining generals gathered, Gannicus, Enemos, Castus, and the Gaulish leader, Gnaeus. Arguments erupted like thunder. "You lead us to death," Gnaeus spat. "Better to die free than kneel again," Gannicus snarled. Enemos struck his staff to the ground. "Enough. We are one people." But Spartacus sat silent. The flame danced across his scarred face. Finally, he spoke quietly, but the fire in his tone silenced all others. "Freedom is not a road you walk once. It is a road you build with the bones of those who refused to kneel. If any among you cannot bear the weight, take your men and go." Gnaeus rose, eyes burning. "Then I will. I will take those who still believe the gods have not cursed us." And so, under a moon red as blood, part of the army turned away, marching eastward into the mist. They would never be seen again. The Brotherhood was broken. 3. The shadow of Crassus, far behind, the Roman legions advanced, methodical and cold. Crassus's trap was working. He had no need to crush Spartacus. He would let hunger, snow, and doubt do it for him. In his war tent, Crassus studied a map illuminated by candlelight. 2 more weeks, he murmured. He will have nowhere left to run. His lieutenant nodded. "The men are restless, my lord. They fear Spartacus even now." Crassus's eyes hardened. "Then remind them, Rome fears no man, especially one born in chains." Outside, thousands of crucifixes lined the road the rebels had taken, each bearing a broken body swaying in the wind. A message to all who dared follow. 4. The descent, snow turned to rain as they descended the foothills. The land grew muddy, treacherous. Horses sank, wagons broke, and food ran out. Spartacus trudged forward, his boots soaked in blood and ice. He carried a child in his arms, a slave boy who had lost his mother to the cold. When the boy asked, "Are we almost free?" Spartacus could not answer. He looked around. The people were dying faster than they could bury their dead. At night, he knelt before the fire, his sword in hand. The blade reflected his weary eyes, once filled with fury, now shadowed by guilt. "Have I led them to freedom," he whispered, "or to the grave?" Gannicus approached quietly. "They still follow you," he said. "That means something." Spartacus shook his head. "Faith is a fragile thing, my friend. It burns bright, and dies faster than the flame that feeds it." The river of ghosts. By dawn, they reached a valley shrouded in mist. Ahead lay a frozen river, the last barrier before the Alpine pass. Beyond it, the chance of freedom. Spartacus ordered his people to cross, but as the first wagons reached the middle, the ice cracked with a sound like thunder. Men screamed. Horses plunged. The river devoured them whole. In moments, the hope of escape sank beneath black water. Spartacus dove in, dragging survivors to shore until his arms burned and his body trembled. When it was over, dozens lay dead. He stood on the riverbank, dripping and breathless, the survivors staring at him in silence. For the first time, he saw in their eyes not devotion, but despair. The path was broken. The dream was fading. The ashes of hope. That night, as the wind howled through the valley, Spartacus stood alone before a dying fire. He could feel Crassus's armies closing in from the south. He closed his eyes and saw visions: Crixus laughing, Inamus shouting in the arena, Gannicus raising his sword to the sky. All of them burned into memory. Perhaps freedom was never meant to be a place. Perhaps it was the struggle itself that made men free. He whispered to the darkness, "If the gods envy us, it is because we fight even when there is no hope." Then, tightening his grip on the sword, he turned to his weary army. His voice, rough and hoarse, still carried like thunder across the night. "This is not the end. So long as one among us breathes, Rome shall tremble." The weary soldiers raised their weapons weakly, but in their eyes, for one last flicker, burned the fire of defiance. Chapter 11. The Siege of the South. When the world closes its gates, the heart of a free man breaks them. The walls of Crassus, the south of Italy, became a graveyard of dreams. Crassus's legions marched with the cold precision of iron, sealing valley after valley, cutting off every road, every hope. From the Tyrrhenian Sea to the Adriatic, the Romans built a wall, a massive trench and rampart stretching 70 miles across the land. It was said that when the birds flew over it, even their shadows vanished. Crassus watched from his command hill, his armor glinting like winter steel. "Let him run," he said to his officers. "Every path leads to the same end, my wall." He raised a hand, and the banners of Rome unfurled in the wind. "Let the gods see," he declared, "that Rome does not break. Rome endures." And so the siege of the south began. 2. The caged lion inside the trap. Spartacus's army camped upon barren ground. The air smelled of smoke and despair. Food was gone. The horses were bones wrapped in skin. Men drank melted snow and shared scraps of leather for bread. Gannicus sat sharpening his sword beside the fire. "When the Romans come, I'll take 10 with me before I fall," he said. Spartacus looked at him, tired, silent. His once golden eyes were now twin storms. "We will not die crawling in a cage," he replied. "If Rome has made a wall, then we will make a hole in the sky." He climbed a ridge, staring toward the Roman lines that glimmered with thousands of fires. Each spark was a heartbeat of the empire that had enslaved him. And yet, he smiled. "Crassus believes this wall is Rome's strength," he murmured. "He forgets that men built it, and men can bleed." 3. The assault in the storm. That night, the heavens split open. Thunder rolled, rain poured, and lightning painted the earth in white fire. Under cover of the storm, Spartacus gathered his fiercest warriors, Gauls, Thracians, Africans, men who had already died 1,000 deaths. He raised his sword. Tonight, we strike the gods themselves. With a roar that shook the night, they charged through the rain, hammers, axes, and torches blazing. They fell upon the Roman fortifications like a wave of shadows. The guards, half blind in the storm, barely saw them coming. Wood splintered, fires erupted, men screamed. Spartacus fought at the front, his sword flashing like lightning. Every strike was vengeance. Every breath was defiance. By dawn, the impossible had happened. The wall was breached. Hundreds of rebels escaped north through the gap before Roman reinforcements arrived. When Crassus reached the scene, his eyes burned with cold fury. "Spartacus," he whispered, "even trapped, he finds wings." He turned to his legate. "Seal it. Seal everything. I want every stone soaked in slave blood before the next sunrise. For the price of freedom, the victory, came at a cost. Thousands lay dead in the mud, men, women, and children who had run toward the breach but never made it." Spartacus stood among the bodies, rain falling upon his armor. The boy he had once carried, the same child who had asked about freedom, lay still in his arms. For the first time, the great warrior's knees gave way. He knelt, silent, as lightning tore the sky above. Gannicus approached quietly. "You gave them a chance," he said. "You gave them something no master ever would." Spartacus shook his head. "I gave them hope, and it killed them." But even in his grief, he could not stop. He looked north, where the survivors marched, a flicker of life amid the ashes. "As long as one breathes," he said softly, "Rome has not won." V. Crassus's fury. In the Roman camp, punishment came swift and merciless. For every soldier who fled his post during the storm, 10 were chosen to die. Decimation, the ancient horror of discipline. Crassus watched as his men drew lots, then executed their brothers in silence. Blood soaked the earth. Fear returned to the hearts of the legions. "Remember," he told them coldly, "Rome stands not because of mercy, but because of fear." He ordered the march south, determined to finish what he started. "The slave runs north," he said, "but death runs faster." Vi. The fire within, meanwhile, Spartacus gathered the remnants of his army. They were starving, broken, and few, but their eyes still burned with the last embers of faith. He spoke to them upon a blackened hill as dawn broke over the horizon. "Brothers, sisters, we are not the weak. We are the memory of the strong. Rome may kill us, but she will never silence us. If we die, let it be on our feet, not our knees." A roar answered him, thin, hoarse, but fierce. The army moved north once more, dragging with them the ghosts of those who had fallen. The wall of Crassus lay behind them, broken, but not forgotten, a wound in the land, a scar upon the empire. And as Spartacus looked back one last time, lightning struck the wall, splitting it in two. He whispered, "You built your wall, Crassus. I built a legend." Chapter 12. The betrayal. Freedom is never taken by chains. It dies only when men trade it for safety. The promise of the sea. The survivors of Spartacus's army marched north for weeks, hungry, hunted, but unbroken. The wind carried the scent of salt. The sea was near. Whispers spread through the camp like fire. "The Cilician pirates. They will take us to freedom." For months, Spartacus had sent envoys to the pirates, offering gold, weapons, and the promise of eternal gratitude in exchange for ships to carry his people across the sea. And now, as they reached the southern coast near Britium, sails appeared on the horizon. The men fell to their knees, crying and laughing. "Freedom," they shouted. "The sea will save us." Spartacus stood on the cliffs, eyes fixed upon the ships glittering in the distance. He allowed himself a single breath of hope, rare, fragile. "Perhaps," he said softly, "the gods are not blind, but in the shadows." Crassus's gold was already buying betrayal, too. The pirates' deception when the ships reached the shore. The pirates sent word, "We shall return at dawn. Prepare your people." Spartacus ordered the camp to ready for departure, forging makeshift rafts, packing what little remained. That night, he stood by the sea and whispered to the waves, "If you take us, I will never curse your depths again." But as dawn came, the horizon was empty. No sails, no oars, no hope. The pirates had taken his gold and fled, leaving the slaves stranded between Rome and the sea. A woman screamed. Another fell to her knees. The army that had fought legions now faced despair it could not fight. Gannicus slammed his sword into the sand. "They sold us, Spartacus. They sold our freedom for coins." Spartacus did not answer. He looked toward the empty horizon and said, almost to himself, "No one sells what they fear to lose. Rome bought them because Rome fears us." He turned to his men, voice hard as stone. "Then we make our stand here. No more running, no more begging. If the gods have abandoned us, we will be our own gods." 3. The shadow within, as they fortified their camp. Rumors spread that some within the army sought to surrender to Rome. Among them was Crixus's former lieutenant, Cassian, who had grown bitter and broken by hunger. That night, Spartacus found him speaking to a group of men. "You think you fight for freedom?" Cassian hissed. "You fight for a dream that died long ago. Crassus will grant mercy to those who kneel. Better a living slave than a dead fool." Spartacus stepped into the light of the fire. His presence silenced the camp. He looked at Cassian for a long time, then said quietly, "You once called me brother. Was that a lie too?" Cassian met his gaze, trembling. "It was hope," he whispered, "and hope starves." Spartacus turned away. "Then let hope die with you." By dawn, Cassian and his followers were gone, vanished into the forest. Hours later, Crassus's scouts found them. Their betrayal led Rome directly to the rebel camp. 4. Crassus closes the circle. When Crassus received word of the deserters, he smiled, a cold, perfect smile. At last he said, "The gods have sided with order." He commanded 6 legions to advance, encircling Spartacus from 3 sides. To the north waited Pompey, marching with fresh legions from Spain. To the south, the sea empty and silent. Rome had closed the circle. Crassus raised his standard high. "Let this end the age of the slave." The Roman drums thundered like the heartbeat of an empire. The last night. That night, Spartacus walked through his camp one final time. Men sharpened blades. Women sang soft lullabies to children who would never see dawn. Gannicus approached him. "When it ends," he said, "do we kneel or fight?" Spartacus smiled faintly. "We have knelt enough for 100 lifetimes. Tomorrow we fight." He stood before his army, tens of thousands once, now but a few thousand shadows. The firelight danced across his face as he spoke. "Brothers, sisters, tomorrow we will die, but not as slaves. Rome believes she will erase us from memory, but every field she sows will remember our blood. Every child born in chains will whisper our names. He raised his sword toward the stormy sky for freedom, and the reply rose like thunder for freedom. Vi, the battle of Bruttium at dawn. The Romans advanced, shields gleaming, banners high. The ground trembled with the march of legions. Spartacus led the charge himself. No armor, no crown, only the iron of his will. He struck straight for Crassus's command line, cutting down centurions as he went. Rain and blood turned the field into a sea of red. For hours, the rebels fought like spirits of vengeance. Gannicus fell beside him, laughing through the blood. Not bad for slaves, eh? Spartacus gripped his friend's shoulder. Not slaves, he said. Brothers. Then an arrow pierced his side. He tore it out, still fighting. A second struck his leg, a third his chest, but he did not fall. He broke through the Roman line, standing face to face with Crassus. Their eyes met, conqueror and defier, empire and rebellion. Spartacus roared and charged, sword raised. Crassus's guards rushed in, and the storm swallowed them all. When the battle ended, no one found Spartacus's body. Only his broken sword lay in the mud, pointing toward the north. 7. The death of a legend. Thousands of slaves were captured and crucified along the Appian Way. 6,000 crosses lining the road to Rome. Crassus rode through the aftermath in silence. Pompey arrived days later, claiming the victory as his own. Rome rejoiced, but in the countryside, whispers remained. They said Spartacus's body was never found because the gods had taken him, that when storms rolled across the southern hills, his war cry could still be heard in the thunder. 8th Epilogue. The flame that never died. Years later, a Roman senator asked a scholar, what was Spartacus? Truly, a rebel, a fool, the scholar replied. He was a man who reminded Rome what fear was and what freedom could be, and so his name lived on, not as a conqueror, but as a warning, not as a slave, but as a symbol. For empires rise and empires fall, but the dream of freedom burns forever. Epic ending. The immortal flame, they said, he was defeated. They said Rome crushed him, yet centuries have passed, and still his name burns like a beacon in the darkness. The empire that crucified him is dust, its marble temples fallen, but the idea he died for remains. For every heart that dares to rise against tyranny, for every voice that cries for freedom, Spartacus lives again. He was no king, no god, no conqueror. He was a man who chose defiance over despair, and that choice, made once, will echo for all eternity. For freedom never dies. It waits in the hearts of those brave enough to fight for it.